Hi guys, it's your English tutor Racquel, and today we're going to start with the book called Life of Pi. And I'm going to go through the characters and we're going to start off with the author. Let's get to know the author a little bit because he did write the book. So the author is Jan Martel and he's a Spanish guy. He was born in Spain. I'm going to put up information like I always do to help us get through the characters from the book Life of Pi. So if we look at some of the information that I have up here for you guys, we can see that he was born in 1963 in Spain, as I said earlier. Jan Martel had a very adventurous life and he lived in a few different countries. He lived in the United States, he lived in Canada, he lived in Costa Rica, and I'm going to put the rest of the countries up so you guys can see just what an adventurous life he had. Jan Martel did go to university and got a BA, which is a Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy, in 1985. So to all your matriculants, I hope you're working really, really hard so that you can get accepted into a higher education institution next year or soon. He also worked so many different jobs. He was a dishwasher, he was a security, a librarian. He did a whole lot of different jobs, so I think we all can too. Martel was a writer, but it was only at the age of 27 that he really committed himself to the art of writing, and he decided to travel to India to write his third novel. And when he was in India, he remembered something, and that's how the Life of Pi began. He wrote the book and it was published in 2001, and this book became an international success. It even won an award. Now I'm going to get into a little bit of the plot and just tell you a little bit about the book. And I am going to be reading because I'm going to put up some notes for you guys and we're going to go through it together. The story is about a boy named Pi Patel, and he's from South India and he's 16 years old. And I think something we already know from the movie is that Pi survives with the tiger at sea for 227 days. So we all call him Pi. Does he have a real name? Absolutely. He was born Prasin Malata Patel and he grows up in the South Indian city of Pondicherry where his father runs a zoo. So knowing that his father runs a zoo tells us animals are not strange to Pi at all. Some information about Pi is and considers himself a devotee to all three religions. Earlier, I mentioned that Pi also lived in Canada. How did that happen? Because he was born in the south of India. So during that time in South India, there was a lot of upheaval going on. So Pi's father decided to sell the zoo and move to Canada. And at this time, Pi was just 16 years old. So Pi's father decided to sell the zoo and move. So who went? It was Pi, his mom, his dad, and he also has a brother called Robbie. And they go with the animals and they decide to sell the animals to people around the world. So the family and the animals are all going across the ocean. So while they're on this journey, which kind of reminds me a little bit of Noah's Ark, but that's something, completely different. So the family and the animals are on this boat, and what happens is the boat capsizes, and Pi is the only one who manages to get onto a lifeboat and actually survive. So Pi survives the shipwreck or the ship sinking, but there are also some animals that survive as well. A hyena survives, a zebra, an orangutan, the tiger. But we all know it's just Pi and the tiger. So what happens to the other animals? So all of them make it to the lifeboat. And you've got one human and you've got all of these animals. And let's find out who eats who. So the hyena kills the zebra, the orangutan, and then it's just kind of the tiger and Pi. I think at this stage I'll tell you what the name of the tiger is because he is an integral part of the story. His name is Richard Parker. Richard Parker is the tiger and it's just Richard Parker and Pi left in the lifeboat. Just a little bit about Richard Parker. He is a male tiger, so we know that he's an adult and he is a male. So Pi is left in this lifeboat and obviously surrounded by water, and the water is shark infested. Somehow from the ship wreckage, Pi manages to build a raft. He builds a raft, and then what he does is he goes onto the raft, leaves the tiger in the lifeboat to create a little bit of distance from him and this male tiger called Richard Parker. So Pi is out on this raft, and it becomes a bit exhausting for him trying to maintain himself on this raft. And he's looking at Richard Parker. He's looking at this tiger, and he says, as soon as this tiger gets hungry, I'm going to be dinner, lunch, or breakfast. And I think I forgot to mention that obviously Richard Parker ended up killing the hyena. So it's just the two of them. So Pi is on this raft thinking, I'm exhausted. I cannot make it any longer on this raft. There's a male adult tiger and I'm about to be eaten. What can I do? So his strategy is to tame the tiger. So he feels like, okay, if I can tame it and we can become friends, I just might survive this. So what does Pi do? He understands that cats or tigers are very territorial. So he decides to demarcate his own little territory on the lifeboat to let Richard Parker know, like, this is my space. And he uses things such as seasickness, is it a turtle or tortoise shield, and also a whistle to let him know this is my territory. You can imagine at sea that they're really going to go through some stuff, and they go through things such as challenges and traumas and just miraculous miracles while the two of them are at sea. They're surrounded by the ocean. There's never enough food, there's never enough water, and just the constant elements of Mother Nature battering the both of them. They have absolutely no shelter. They are open to the elements, and that is very challenging. They also encounter a very, very strong storm which destroys the raft, and that is something that the two of them go through together. Pi does have some accomplishments. He catches a bird and kills it, and they also encounter like an oil tanker. But the oil tanker passes them by and doesn't even see them. Hunger gets so bad for Richard Parker and Pi that their hunger and starvation causes both of them to go blind. While they're both blind, Pi starts to hear a voice and he realizes it's an actual human being. So they come across another survivor at sea, also blind, but he happens to be a Frenchman. So Pi and the Frenchman, start talking, and then the Frenchman comes on board, but then the Frenchman decides to attack Pi and kill him. But what the Frenchman hasn't realized, because he's blind, is there's a tiger on board, and the Frenchman accidentally goes into Richard Parker's territory, because remember, Pi and Richard Parker, they have, a whole territory thing going on. So the Frenchman accidentally goes into the tiger, aka Richard Parker's territory, and now he has some problems. So tigers are going to do what they do, and Richard Parker kills the Frenchman. And it's at this moment where there's a little bit of a moral story or moral meaning that comes with it, which really does affect Pi. Finally, there's some type of land. Richard Parker and Pi, come across an island, but it's a bit of a weird island because there's no life. This island is, like surrounded by algae, and there are some trees. So they stay there for a little while, for a few weeks. They were staying on the island, and they had some fresh water, they were eating the algae, but they never stay there at night. So as the weeks go by, Pi feels like, let me try and sleep on the island. But what he realizes is that this island releases acids and gases that destroy life. And Pi feels like it's time for me and Richard Parker to leave. So they leave the island and they eventually come across a beach, and this is a Mexican beach. So once they hit the beach, Richard Parker kind of runs off into the jungle, leaving Pi. And it's at this point that Pi kind of feels deserted. In his mind, he's felt like him and Richard Parker have been on, this adventure. And the moment they reach beach, Richard Parker deserts him. So while on the Mexican beach, Japanese men find Pi. They feed him, they take him to a hospital, and then they start, questioning him and asking him, like, what happened? What happened? How did y'all's boat sink? While he's telling them the story, they don't believe him. And so in that moment, Pi feels like, okay, what can I do? So he replaces the human names with the animals. So he gives the animals the human names, and then he tells the Japanese the story, which kind of casts doubt on his original story because he's changing it because they just don't believe him. You'll find that throughout the book, there's a bit of disruption that goes on because there are notes from the author about Pi that keep interrupting the story. So Pi recovers in Mexico, so he's basically on that side of the world closer to like North America, is basically on the North American continent. And so he then moves to Canada where he completes school. And then Pi goes on to the University of Toronto where he studies, religious studies. And we know that, there's three different religions that, are close to his heart. And he also goes on to study zoology. As Pi grows up, we learn that he eventually gets married and he has kids. But throughout that, he still thinks of Richard Parker, and that feeling of being deserted is something that's still in him and something that he still hasn't dealt with.